Imagine an aircraft not designed for beauty, not at all, but for sheer resilience.
Yeah.
A plane so dependable it became this absolute workhorse, across multiple theaters of war.
Everywhere.
From that iconic Doolittle Raid over Tokyo to the brutal low-level strafing in the Pacific.
Right.
It adapted, it evolved, and maybe became the most heavily armed aircraft of its kind. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the legendary North American B-25 Mitchell.
It's a fascinating one.
Thank you for joining us for another deep dive. This is where we take, well, a whole stack of fascinating information, and we distill it down into the most important nuggets of knowledge for you.
Trying to cut through the noise.
Exactly. So today, we're sifting through some incredible sources, covering everything from the Mitchell's initial design, its evolving camouflage schemes,
Which changed quite a bit.
to its pivotal role in some of World War II's most daring missions, and, maybe most incredibly, its transformation into this ground attack monster.
A totally different beast by the end.
Our mission here is simple. Give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed about this legendary bomber. So, as you listen, please, we encourage you, comment on what stands out to you.
We love hearing that.
Like this deep dive if you find it valuable, and please share it. Share it with others who love uncovering these surprising facts. Your engagement really helps us reach more curious minds.
It absolutely does. So, okay, let's unpack this unique aircraft. And we should probably start with its birth story, which is pretty surprising.
How so?
Well, what's fascinating is, unlike most aircraft, the Mitchell just skipped the entire prototype phase. There was no XB-25.
Really? Straight into production?
Yep. Ordered directly into production, February 1941.
Yeah.
It really speaks volumes about the immediate need,
Wow. So similar to the B-26 Marauder then?
Exactly. That same kind of urgent push.
That's highly unusual, though, skipping that whole prototype stage.
Yeah.
What does that tell us? I mean, about the pressures back then, and what made it so indispensable, even if, well, sources say it was devoid of beautiful lines.
Yeah, not a looker, was it? Compared to the Marauders, especially.
Right.
But it's a great question, and the answer is just pure practicality. Despite that, let's say, aesthetic critique, its core advantages were just undeniable. Dependability, first off, ease of flight, simplicity of servicing, and remarkable durability.
Things you really need in a warplane.
Absolutely critical. These weren't just nice-to-haves. They made it, and I quote, a highly prized combat aircraft. Pretty much everywhere it served, it just delivered.
Yeah, that's early look. That early identity was quite striking, wasn't it? Especially compared to later versions.
Yeah.
Those very first B-25s back in August 1940, they rolled out in just a natural metal finish.
That's right, bare metal. And they had these really specific, almost intricate U.S. nationality markings.
Like what?
Well, you had these big 50-inch insignia blue discs, the cocards, on both the top and bottom of the wings.
Okay.
The white star, and inside that, a red inner disc. That red disc wouldn't last long, though. And then on the rudder, these vertical insignia blue stripes, followed by like 7 red and 6 white horizontal stripes, really stood out.
Very bold.
And under the wings, big black letters, U.S. under the right, Army under the left, 24 inches high.
So a really visible identity. Very different from what you think of later in the war, the more subtle stuff.
Definitely. And there were other bits, too, like a 5-inch wide red propeller arc warning stripe on the fuselage sides.
Right. Keep ground crews safe.
And these dark olive drab anti-glare patches, one between the cockpit and the bombardier nose, and more on the engine cowlings.
But interestingly, you said only the first 9 were like that. Natural metal.
Exactly. Just the first 9.
Yeah.
After that, the shift to camouflage was, well, immediate and universal for all the next B-25s and the B-25A models.
So what was the standard camo then?
It became dark olive drab, that's shade 41 on all the upper surfaces, and then neutral gray, shade 43 on the undersides.
And the line between them.
Described as fairly straight, not the wavy patterns you saw sometimes. But this wasn't the only quick change happening.
I can imagine. Things were moving fast.
Yeah?
There was a military directive, right? A technical order in February 41.
Yep. Mandated big revisions to the national insignia. So those big wing cocards we talked about, gone. Removed from the upper right and lower left wings.
Okay, so where'd they go?
Instead, they applied them to both sides of the rear fuselage. A bit smaller now, 45 inches in diameter.
And the rudder stripes?
Also gone, all discontinued at the same time. And, even the exact spot they put those fuselage cocards varied a little. Like on the B-25A, it was aft of the rear observation windows.
Right.
But on the B-25B, it was further forward, about 94 inches from the wing root trailing edge. Just small adjustments, probably driven by, internal changes, new
That
equipment,
makes sense.
constantly evolving. So the first unit to really get equipped with these was the 17th Bombardment Group out in Oregon. So that's right, Pendleton, Oregon. By September 1941, they had a full complement, about 13 B-25s or B-25As per squadron, plus 3 for the Group HQ.
And they had their own ID system too, didn't they? Something pretty distinct before things got standardized.
They absolutely did. Very specific. On the tail fins, big 12-inch black characters, 17B for the group. And then just above that, a smaller plane in group number, like 1 to 99. And that same number was repeated on the nose, smaller again.
And colors were their squadron colors.
Oh, yeah. That was the cool part. Squadron identification was by the color of the engine cowl ring. Dark blue for the 34th Bomb Squadron, yellow for the 73rd, white for the 95th, and red for the 89th Reconnaissance Squadron.
Wow, that sounds vivid.
Plus, full-color official squadron emblems painted on the right side of the nose. It was quite a display, really.
That sounds incredible, almost like peacetime markings. So what happened to all that color?
Well, sadly but predictably, most of it disappeared pretty quickly after the U.S. entered the war in December 41. By early 1942, most of those unit badges, the designator markings, the cowl colors, gone. Wartime necessity just streamlined everything. Function over flair.
Makes perfect sense. And, well, this leads us right into arguably the Mitchells' most famous moment, the Doolittle Raid, April 1942.
Absolutely iconic.
Such a critical morale boost, wasn't it, in those really dark early days of the war? Just an audacious plan.
Totally audacious. You had crews from that same 17th Bomb Group, 16 B-25Bs taking off from an aircraft carrier, the USS Hornet, in the Pacific.
Which is just unprecedented for medium bombers back then.
Yeah.
Launching off a carrier deck.
Unheard of. These planes had the standard camouflage finish by then, but they added new tail designator markings, basically radio call numbers based on the plane's serial number, 9-inch high figures on the fins and rudders.
And the leader, of course, Jimmy Doolittle himself. Already famous, right? Yeah. Stunt flyer, aviation pioneer.
A legend already.
And there's that great story about how he actually got to lead the mission. General Hap Arnold apparently turned him down flat first. Said he was too valuable, maybe too old at 45 for combat.
Right. Arnold wanted to protect him.
But Doolittle, being Doolittle, apparently sprinted straight from Arnold's office to Major General Millard Harmon's office.
Uh-huh.
And he kind of spun Arnold's words just enough to make Harmon think Arnold was okay with it, or at least hadn't forbidden it. Harmon immediately gave his consent.
Huh. Brilliant bureaucratic maneuvering. A bit of loophole exploitation there.
Exactly. So the raid itself. Targets in Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe. Key industrial spots.
Yep. And the most striking thing about the attack phase, Japanese air defenses were, and this is a quote, completely unprepared and bewildered.
Wow.
None of the B-25s were shot down by fighters or anti-aircraft fire. Only one plane got lightly hit by flak. It was just stunning tactical surprise.
But the aftermath.
Yeah.
That's where things got incredibly tough, didn't they?
Yeah, the aftermath was brutal for many. They faced really bad headwinds, much worse than expected, burned through fuel faster, and had to fly into China at night.
Not the plane.
Definitely not the plan. One plane actually ended up landing near Vladivostok in Soviet territory. The crew was interned. The Soviets kept the plane, though the crew did eventually escape over a year later.
And the others trying for China.
11 crews managed to bail out over China, mostly near a place called Chuchao, or Zuzhou now. But tragically, one man was killed in a bad parachute landing.
Oh, no.
And one entire crew was captured by the Japanese. Of those 5 men, 2 were later executed, and the other 3 remained prisoners for the rest of the war.
Horrific.
Yeah. And then 4 other planes crash-landed. 2 crews luckily survived uninjured, but the other 2 crash landings resulted in 2 crew fatalities and more captures, some of whom were also executed by the Japanese.
Just incredible stakes. An unbelievable mix of success and tragedy.
Absolutely. It really highlights the sheer bravery and the immense risks those airmen took.
That raid really cemented the Mitchells' reputation early on, didn't it? Showcasing its capability and the courage of its crews.
It absolutely did. Put it on the map globally.
But its story goes way beyond that one mission. The B-25 was soon deployed all over the world, adapted for all sorts of Allied forces.
Oh yeah, it spread far and wide. There was even this interesting little episode where some B-25Cs originally built for Britain under contract.
All right.
They actually received RAF-style roundels and fin flashes right there at the factory in the U.S.
So they look like British planes.
For a bit, yeah. But then logistics being what they are in wartime, they were not dispatched to Britain, but diverted to USAAF units in the United States.
Well,
So what happened was the U.S. national insignia, the star, was just applied right over the top of the British roundels.
that must have looked odd.
Yeah, created some really irregular markings for a short time in early 42, a real mix and match look.
Huh. Wartime expediency. So the first complete Mitchell combat group sent overseas, where did they go?
That was the 12th Bombardment Group. They were sent to the Middle East, arriving around August 1942.
Desert environment, different needs, right?
Exactly. So their B-25Cs had their upper surfaces painted sand, which was actually kind of a pinkish shade 49. Better camouflage for the desert terrain.
Makes sense. And they had their own markings, too.
Yeah, they used various radio call numbers, sometimes yellow, sometimes black, and also battle numbers like 1 to 99, painted in white on the fin and rudder. Initially quite large, 30 inches, later standardized to 24 inches.
Okay.
And importantly for recognition in that theater, these USAAF planes in the Middle East often carried additional national insignia.
More stars. Where?
On the upper right and lower left wings, the spots they'd removed them from earlier back in the States.
Ah, putting them back on.
Yeah, for better ID.
Yeah.
And they also added red, white, and blue RAF-type fin flashes on all four sides of the tail fins.
So a real blend of U.S. and British markings for Allied identification.
Exactly. Crucial for interoperability when you had U.S. and British Air Forces operating side by side. And the RAF itself, they ended up getting a lot of Mitchells.
They did.
Oh, yeah. They received 367 B-25Cs and 212 B-25Ds. They called them the Mitchell Mark II.
Mitchell Mark II.
They flew their first raid against Nazi targets on January 22nd, 1943, and they played a big part in the lead up to D-Day, attacking coastal defenses, V-weapon sites. They also got 375 B-25Js later, the Mitchell Mark III.
So a significant contribution to the RAF.
Definitely. But it didn't stop there. The Mitchell went everywhere.
Like where else?
Well, the Royal Australian Air Force, the RAAF, used them a lot, especially for low-level strikes in the Pacific. They often field-fitted them with even more guns.
Always more guns with the Mitchell.
It seems to be the theme. Brazil used them for coastal patrol, and some even saw combat with the Brazilian Expeditionary Force in Italy.
Wow.
The Royal Canadian Air Force used them for mapping, transport, training. The Dutch government in exile flew them, first in the Dutch East Indies, then later under RAF command in Australia. Nationalist Chinese forces got them. The Free French operated them. It was truly a global aircraft.
The numbers must have been huge then.
Staggering. Total production was somewhere between 9,815 and 9,884 Mitchells, depending on the source you check. Almost 10,000 planes.
Incredible. Truly a workhorse that just spread across the globe, became a staple for so many Allied nations.
It really did.
So, okay, that global reach is impressive. But let's talk about its combat evolution. Because this is where the Mitchell really transformed, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
From being, a fairly standard medium bomber to this absolute ground attack monster.
That's the perfect word for it. And what's amazing is the basic airframe, from the A model right through to the final J model, it remained, quote, virtually unchanged.
Really? The same basic shape.
Pretty much. But it's ordnance, the guns that grew and proliferated in a way that totally changed the airplane's mission.
So it's all about the firepower.
All about the firepower. It became, arguably, the most heavily armed aircraft in the U.S. Army Air Force's inventory. Get this stat. A single 12-plane squadron of B-25s carried more .50 caliber machine guns than 4 infantry regiments.
Wow. That's an insane amount of firepower concentrated in just 12 planes.
Astonishing, isn't it?
Especially when you think about how it started. Initially, its defensive armament was seen as kind of, cumbersome and ineffective, according to some sources.
Yeah, it wasn't great at first. You had a single .3 caliber nose gun manually aimed, a waist gunner who had to switch between 2 .30s on either side,
Right.
and that ventral gun tray underneath. It took almost a minute just to extend it.
A minute. in combat.
Yeah, and the gunner used this periscopic sight that apparently often made them airsick. Not ideal.
Not ideal at all.
Really, the tail gunner position with its twin point 50s was the most useful part of the early defensive setup.
So a definite need for improvement there. How did that happen?
Well, here's where some real larger-than-life characters come in. Enter Lieutenant General George C. Kenney. He ran the Southwest Pacific 5th Air Force. His boss, none other than Douglas MacArthur, famously described Kenney as born 300 years too late, a natural-born pirate.
I like that.
And Kenney had this aptly named pal, Colonel Paul the Scun, known as Pappy Gun.
Pappy Gun. Heard of him.
Right. Described as a junkyard genius and a master fabricator. Kenney's whole philosophy was simple but ambitious. Achieve air control so supreme that the birds have to wear Air Force insignia.
Love that quote. So what did Kenney and this pirate Pappy Gun cook up?
They basically invented the commerce destroyer. They took standard B-25s and transformed them into these fearsome anti-shipping strafers, specifically for the Pacific Theater.
What did Gun actually do?
Pappy Gun's field modifications became legendary. He started adding 4 fixed 12.7 millimeter, that's .50 caliber Browning machine guns right in the nose.
Yeah, fixed forward firing.
Yeah. And then he added 2 or sometimes even 4 more in external pods, these cheek pods mounted below the cockpit sides.
Bolted on the outside.
Pretty much. And get this, they even modified the top turret so it could be locked facing forward, adding its 2.50s to the forward barrage.
So how many guns is that total firing forward?
The result was this devastating battery of often 14.50 caliber machine guns, with a total throw weight of about 215 pounds per second.
1450s. All firing at once.
Yeah. And some versions of the later B-25J reportedly had as many as 18 forward-firing machine guns. Just an absolute wall of lead.
Unbelievable. That completely changes the role from bomber to strafer.
Totally. And they combined this massive firepower with a new tactic also developed under Kenney, skip bombing.
Ah, yes. Skip bombing sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was, but highly effective against ships. Kenney's crews perfected it. They'd fly really low over the water.
Vast height.
Sometimes even lower. They'd spray the target ship with all those nose guns to suppress the enemy anti-aircraft gunners.
Right. Clear the decks.
Exactly. And then they'd release a bomb, usually with a short time delay fuse, maybe 4 or 5 seconds. So it would literally skip across the water like a stone.
Wow.
And slam into the side of the ship at the waterline, hopefully below any armor belt, before exploding.
That takes incredible timing and nerve.
Absolutely. They apparently tried it first with slower planes like B-17s, but the B-25 speed, combined with that massive frontal armament, made it particularly suited and devastating for skip bombing.
So this led to specific factory-built strafer versions then?
It did. You got the B-25G and the B-25H models. These featured the solid nose versions, replacing the bombardier station entirely with guns.
What kind of guns?
Well, besides more .50s, they famously mounted a massive 75mm cannon in the nose.
A 75 mil, like a tank cannon.
Basically, yeah. A manually loaded M4 cannon, though sources do note it proved to be more trouble than it was worth in practice. Slow rate of fire, heavy recoil.
I can imagine.
So, while impressive, maybe not the most practical weapon, these G&H models served mainly in the Pacific, focusing on low-level attack, anti-shipping, ground support.
And then came the J model, the most produced one.
That's right. The B-25J, over 4,300 built. It kind of consolidated things. It came in both a glass-nose bomber version and a solid-nose strafer version with 8 forward-firing .50s.
So options.
Options, yeah. And some of these Js became the PBJ-1J for the U.S. Marine Corps.
PBJ.
Yeah, patrol bomber, J model. The Marines often equipped theirs with radar, sometimes in a pod on the right wingtip.
For anti-shipping or night work.
Exactly. And some PBJs even carried massive Tiny Tim unguided rockets under the fuselage. Huge 11.75-inch rockets.
This plane just kept getting more heavily armed.
It really did. A continuous evolution.
And the markings, the camouflage, did that keep changing on these later G, H, and J models too?
Subtly, yes. On the camouflaged ones, the dividing line between the olive drab top and the gray underside tended to become a fairly straight line.
As opposed to the earlier wavy ones.
Right. Some sources say this offered a better blend, maybe easier to apply too. They also deleted that red propeller arc warning stripe on the G models and late D models, just simplifying things.
And the national insignia, the star and bars.
That got standardized for a while at 45 inches diameter, but later on the B-25J, it often increased again to 50 inches. And its placement on the fuselage sometimes shifted a bit due to minor changes in the fuselage shape or equipment placement.
Always adapting.
Always. And beyond these main combat roles, the Mitchell proved incredibly versatile elsewhere, too.
Like what other jobs did it do?
Well, it served as a dedicated reconnaissance aircraft, designated F-10. Some were stripped down and used for fast transport and communications duties.
Okay.
You'd see some of those transports in natural metal finish again, or sometimes painted black overall for, clandestine night operations.
Sneaky.
And there was even a white sea search paint scheme used for anti-submarine patrols.
White for over the ocean.
Yeah, counterintuitive maybe, but effective for spotting surface subs from above against the dark water, and harder for the sub to spot the plane against the bright sky.
Interesting. And training units had their own look, too.
Yep. Training units often use simple white plane-on-base numbers for local identification. Later in the war, they adopted more standardized organizational code markings, like letters and numbers.
Just incredibly adaptable. A true jack-of-all-trades aircraft.
It really was.
And, it's interesting if you look at insights from, virtual combat, flight simulators, online forums.
Oh, yeah. What do the virtual pilots say?
Well, you get a modern appreciation for its perceived strengths and weaknesses. Players consistently highlight those deadly frontal .50s in head-on fights.
The strafer versions, yeah.
Yeah. Some call it the hardest bomber to kill for certain Japanese fighters, because approaching from the front was just suicidal.
I believe it.
They also praise its generally good bomb load, especially the PBJ-1J's 75mm cannon for taking out tanks or pillboxes in those games. And the defensive turrets, particularly the rear and top ones, are seen as pretty effective.
So it holds up well in simulation?
In many ways, yes. But they also point out the vulnerabilities. Some players joke about the elevators attached by cardboard tubes, meaning the tail controls were seen as fragile and easily damaged.
A weak spot.
And there's a perception of it being prone to fire. Comments like wing roots filled with and engines fueled by napalm.
Yeah.
An exaggeration, obviously, but pointing to vulnerability there.
Fuel tanks and engines are always vulnerable spots.
Right. And a big one they consistently mention. Almost no gun coverage on the belly. A real blind spot underneath.
Ah, that ventral turret wasn't effective then.
Apparently not. Or it was often removed in later strafer versions anyway.
Hmm.
So the recommended tactic you see online. Attack from above, or dive in from the dead zone, directly behind and slightly above the twin rudders.
Okay, exploit the blind spots.
Yeah, and definitely avoid attacking from directly behind at the same level, or from directly below. The tail guns and top turret cover those areas well.
Fascinating. It gives you a real sense of the tactical puzzle, doesn't it? The considerations crews and their opponents faced.
Exactly. It sort of brings the historical accounts to life, seeing how those strengths and weaknesses play out, even in a simulation.
Truly does. Paints a very complete picture.
So let's recap this deep dive then. We've seen how the B-25 Mitchell, this plane, valued way more for its practicality, its ruggedness, than its looks.
Definitely.
How it evolved from a pretty standard medium bomber into this incredibly adaptable and eventually massively armed combat aircraft.
Yeah, its story is just one of continuous modification, constant tactical innovation, driven by the demands of the battlefield.
From that incredibly daring Doolittle Raid that gave everyone a much-needed boost,
It's a huge moment.
to its final role as this fearsome strafer, especially in the Pacific, but really serving across every major theater of World War II.
The Mitchell's whole journey, really, from that basic off-the-drawing-board design to all those complex, often field-expedient adaptations, it just reveals how intense wartime pressure can ignite radical ingenuity.
Yeah. It wasn't just about building a plane. It was about constantly reinventing it, wasn't it? On the fly, responding to threats, seizing opportunities.
Exactly. Pushing the limits of the airframe and its mission.
Which kind of brings us to a final thought, maybe something provocative for you to consider. What does this intense cycle, this battlefield-driven innovation we saw with the B-25, what does it tell us about human problem solving? Not just in conflict, obviously, but maybe in any high-stakes environment. Any situation where the demands are just relentless and the stakes require constant, rapid evolution.
That's a great question to ponder. How pressure shapes innovation.
Something to mull over.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the B-25 Mitchell. It's been fascinating to revisit its story.
It really has. And if you enjoyed unpacking the history and the incredible evolution of this legendary aircraft with us, please consider liking this deep dive.
Please do.
Comment below. Let us know your own insights, your questions, maybe your favorite Minchell story, and please share this with someone else who you think would find this knowledge valuable.
Your support genuinely means the world to us and helps us keep doing these deep dives.
Absolutely. Thanks again for listening.